かりおしまい。
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Get the Mic, the only show where your host on the left, Owl,
and your host on the right, Brock,
dissect fiction for its mythological significance. In this episode, we're talking about Dragon Ball as usual, and in particular, episode 94, which is called Stepping Down, or in the Japanese, Yikes, the new Crane Hermit styles Taiyukin. And we're going to talk about the solar flare here in a bit.
the Taiyukin.
But before we get started, as usual, if you like what you hear, please give us a like, subscribe to our channel. We upload on Mondays and Thursdays to YouTube and Tuesdays and Fridays to Rumble, so give us a subscribe over there. We'd love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments as well. Anything to say, Brock?
No, other than I think this will be, we're just going to call it, I think this will be a longer episode.
Yeah, so let's
It's
go
going
ahead
to be a
and
big one.
dive straight into it. So, in the hospital, a nurse brings Yamcha a radio to listen to Jackie Chun's fight with Tien. Back in the ring, Tien launches himself into the air toward the sun before plunging down at Jackie with a cross attack. His attack is easily deflected and the two struggle against each other's strength. Tien delivers a kick that nearly knocks Jackie out of the ring. When he catches himself, Tien grapples him at the edge of the ring, repeatedly headbutting him. Jackie delivers a single headbutt and returns to the center of the ring, astonishing the crowd and the announcer with their skill. So, a couple of things here. I think the cross attack and the launching into the sun is a big symbol for how Tien has been able to integrate the knowledge that he has already interacted with.
Well, remember in the previous episode when he had done his cross attack from below, right? And so this is really, we spent so much time talking about that Axis Mundi symbolism. And it's like you've got the cross down low and you've got the cross above, right? In the same way, it's sort of like the two bells of awakening. And so he demonstrates the other end of it here, sort of as a continuation of his power scaling as he expresses himself to Jackie Chun, right?
It's also it reminds me of the semifinals in the last tournament as well, because that's where we saw the cross attack that Goku had to integrate with Nam, right?
Mm-hmm.
And similarly to it, it's something that Tien has an understanding of and can wield as a weapon, though he's not actually here instantiating a path higher than himself like Nam was, but he's manipulating the knowledge that he has of it to exploit that as a weapon.
Well, what we do know is that he has directed his energy at this tournament for the sake of something bigger than himself, right? He's doing it for the honor of his school, in his mind anyway.
Well, I think now he's doing it for vengeance, right?
Right. So something that's scaled above this hierarchy in a sense,
Well,
right? It's more meta.
more what I meant was a selfless, like a heroic act, like Nam's, for example, was the salvation of his village. For
Right.
let's say,
But that's what I mean, right? It's a higher order goal, right? That you nest this ambition within. And so and I think that's part of Tien's third eye as well, right? And it's that ability to have that higher sight. And with it comes the propensity to look down at people, but having it and what that means for your character, right?
right? And what that means for Tien against Jackie is basically nothing because Jackie has already been able to integrate this. He is the spiritual father. The whole idea of using that point of suffering and ultimate meaning as a weapon against Jackie is not going to work to begin with because he's kind of living it right now as Jackie to begin with. He's kind of placed himself in the Axis Mundi as uh instead of Roshi, let's say, by adopting this responsibility and entering the tournament to begin with.
Right.
So obviously, it doesn't have an effect on Jackie, but it does let us see the level at which Tien is operating.
Right. I think to be more specific, it's the idea that Roshi would be in this tournament for the sake of his pupils, which is for a bigger idea than he knows that he could express in the world. He has subordinated himself to a higher form of hierarchy as well. It's something that's integrated in the fact that he's even here in the first place, right?
Not just to say that, but the idea that the meaning derived is at the maximal point of suffering is something that Roshi has already exhibited the knowledge of through his training with his students. Like he's already mastered this concept that Tien's trying to bludgeon him with.
Sure.
And so by entering in as Jackie Chun, right, that point of maximal suffering where he is going to have to,
It's the carrying of the cross.
yeah, and that's what
Yeah.
he does for his students.
Yeah.
And so it obviously doesn't do anything to Jackie, right? He's and by that I mean Roshi is kind of immune to spiritual attacks in that fashion. He is the spiritual father after all. And so it kind of impresses that both of these characters have somewhat of an equal strength because they struggle against each other here, and it doesn't seem like anyone has the upper hand. When Tien delivers that kick, though, that knocks Jackie almost out of the ring, we get a little exchange, which is very technical, right? Because we see Tien try to grab him, and his hands get bound by Jackie's let's say chest and arms, pinned between his chest and arms.
Right.
And so Jackie has to keep that force up, but it's almost a game of it's not just balance, but it's a very technical manifestation of the manipulation of one's, what do I want to say, will, because the hands are such a symbolic thing for one's manifestation in the world.
Right. And to he places himself like an anchor there, right? And
Hmm.
he assures him that if he falls out, he will be able to make him fall first, right? There's
Right.
this leveraging of his weight against him that Roshi does. So he binds his ability to reach out. He binds his hands.
His ability to manifest in the world, right? And so he's
Yes.
kind of pinned there to where Roshi can then manipulate him, and it's because of his overreach, no pun intended, that happens, right? Roshi is able to exploit that from him, and that's Tien's kind of big weakness is that he is strong, he is powerful, but that arrogance that he exhibits, that's the first step on that unholy trinity, um, is the fault in Tien's spirit. But go ahead.
Yeah, it's in a sense the seeing of or the calling out of the blindness of the father, right? So what um Jackie Chun's doing here, it's almost like he's putting on a show, taking this kick and falling and hanging suspended off of the edge of the ring the way that he does, then flipping up on the edge. It's sort of like Are you going to exploit that about my weakness, or are you going to be respectful to your elders, let's say? And we see what his response is to this later on. And so it's a call to him to see whether or not he will exploit an advantage against someone who is older and more experienced, right?
And let's say attempt to reveal the vulnerability of the spiritual father, and let's say the idea of the father as such to the world on this stage that is broadcast to everyone, let's say.
Right. It's a meta game that Tien continues to play. Right.
Right, and it's one that he said Tao Pai Pai would appreciate, and I think that's correct.
Yes. And the interesting thing about it is that the only thing he has left to try to win it is to essentially knock Jackie Chun unconscious, right? To pit head against head, right?
Hmm.
And to overcome him with, you could say his hard headedness, but generally he's like smashing the area of his third eye against Roshi's forehead, and it makes a red spot on the middle of his forehead like a third eye,
Hmm.
right? And that's sort of like he's imposing that sight on the father, right? And he's beating him down with it to
Well,
knock
he's
him out of the game as such.
right. That's Tien's motivation, but how it works symbolically in the story is that it actually awakens Roshi to what we're gonna see kind of happen
Right.
next.
It enlightens Roshi, right? And we see it marks him when he does this. So Roshi does it back and it centers him, puts him right back in the middle of the ring.
Right. And so then Jackie asks Tien why he still follows the Crane Hermit, given the strength that he appears to have. Tien tells Jackie that not to insult his master and decides to fight seriously for a moment. He then uses a new Crane Hermit technique, the Solar Flare, or I think that's the Tayukin that
I
we
believe.
heard about. Yes, blinding Jackie and the audience before delivering a kick to the back of Jackie Chun's head. Tien states that he didn't kill Jackie in order to stay in the tournament, though Jackie will never again awaken. It appears as if Jackie has lost the match, but he picks himself up at the last moment and tells Tien that he should treat older people with more respect. So we have a lot going on here. The first thing is the that first instantiation we see that Roshi is trying to plant the seed of doubt in Tien. And I think this is a very interesting part, and I rarely have seen it in other forms of media. The idea that people behaving, doing things they know to be wrong, know that to be wrong, let's say.
They have to grapple with it. They have to reckon with it.
Right, like let's take for example, Thanos was never not convinced of his rightness.
Right.
And I think it's hard to see in other media where that kind of conflict happens, and we see it here with Tien. He actually has substantial physicality, and the words he chooses imply that he is grappling with it. And this is the very first little drop we get from it, and it's because why he's currently contending with the spiritual father. He as in Tien has gone into the unknown, into this tournament where he thinks, as arrogant as he is, that he's kind of above the game, right? But the game of games involved with being involved with the game of games leaves its mark on you regardless. And so by being involved with it, he's exposed to the spiritual father. He's looked past that unknown part, right? He's already defeated Yamcha. And now that he's experiencing that, he sees what flaws are within him, which is exactly what Roshi does to everyone that he meets. He points out their flaws, just like the spiritual father does in all of these mythological stories. And so the very first instantiation we see here, he just asks him why he still follows the Crane Hermit at all. And at that, of course, Tien, knowing what he's doing is wrong, can't respond with any rationale, but he gets more emotionally charged and decides to try and fight Jackie for real and use the solar flare. And I'll go ahead and let you explain some solar flare since I've been talking a bit.
So his solar flare is his ability to blind the spiritual father, right? It's a power above to it's essentially a power above what we've seen expressed, right? It's a real step up to he recognizes not only does he recognize with his third eye, with his enlightenment, what the flaws are with the spiritual father, but he can actually remove more sight from the spiritual father, you can say, right? So in this conflict,
Hmm.
his use of the solar flare is a blinding thing, right? And as he's Jackie Chun instead of Roshi, this actually it's effective against him. Now, what he's doing in doing the solar flare, I'm like 50% on what I think about what it's going to represent. To me, it is a blinding enlightenment that comes from that spot in the center of the forehead, right? That everyone who witnesses it is dazzled, right? It takes away their ability to see. What do you think that means?
I came at it from I think an entirely different angle than you at this juncture because I was thinking more about an eclipse. Tien is putting himself in because Tien is dark even in the usage of the attack. He's putting himself in front of the sun as if he was the moon to block out the sun, right?
So
That's what's
takes away the light.
right. It's not
Oh, I see.
yes, it's not
I didn't
so
really
much
imagine it coming from behind him, but coming from his eye because of the way the that he gestures with it, right?
right.
And every time someone does it, they have their hands spread out across their forehead, right?
Right. But that's because they're blocking, right? It's so what do you think about it from that angle? I'm curious.
It's because they're blocking. What do you mean?
Well, I'm saying the as far as the gesture for it, they're making that larger and they're blocking out as much light as they can. And so,
So you think they're just trying to block as much light by spreading their hands out like that?
I mean, I'm not 100% on it, but it's almost like the phases of a solar eclipse, right? Less blockage, and then that middle part where you're talking about with the eye
Mhm.
is what really blocks out the light itself. And it's always focused on the head too every time people use it.
Yeah.
Every time characters use it in the show, let's say. And so in my interpretation, it really is the character instantiating themselves in front of the sun and blocking out the light by their own manifestation, their own instantiation. And the fact that it's strong enough to do that is what is blinding about it.
Interesting. See, I had just never taken it from the eclipse angle. It always seems to me like it projects a light out
It's like a
from the
mini
user.
it's like, well, it has to have the sun has to be up, right? It's a solar flare.
Right, but a solar flare is like whenever the energy flares out and becomes blinding, not when it's eclipsed, right?
Mhm.
So I always interpreted it as sort of a channeling of that light through the third eye so that everyone who has eyes open and are
But
attentive to it,
it's an unholy
it's
attack. That's why
yeah.
I don't think it's that.
Yeah, I like the imagery of the eclipse because what it ultimately does is that, right?
Mhm.
Is it eclipses that enlightenment by placing the self in sort of a well, you're facing completely away from the light by doing it, right?
Mhm. And looking down
It's
on
the
those who are
opposite.
blinded by
You could say it's
your
the opposite of the scene where Goku is standing at the top of Korin Tower staring into the sun, right? He's
right,
faced
yeah.
completely away from the sun, and by doing so is like
And by having
well, that's what his character has been doing, right? Is he's trying to demoralize people, right? And what better representation of that ability to demoralize
them
somebody
blocking out the sun.
than orienting yourself perfectly away from the sun and creating
Right,
that
exactly.
disintegration
Right.
such that people witness it and are blinded by it.
Right, and that's why I don't think it's because I don't think it's Tien and the Crane Hermit being able to manipulate the enlightenment of light itself or the sun as such, the sun god, right? he who battles the moon every night and comes on the other day victorious, right? I don't think they're able to manipulate that. That's a power that is beyond them at this point. But being
Right.
able to do the unholy thing that we're talking about,
Like in the action of orienting yourself that way, creating
hmm
this impression, right?
I think that's what it is.
And I think that, whenever you look at an eclipse, you need something to shade your eyes, right? And that's
Exactly.
what you're doing whenever you have sunglasses.
And so one more thing that I do want to mention is that Roshi normally has his glasses, but now he's exposed himself to that vulnerability that we've been talking about that has to be instantiated where there is meaning. And so he's had to strip himself of that and become more of his authentic self in Jackie Chun.
Right.
And so
Through the side of Jackie or
and
through the side of Tien.
so as he's
Yeah.
opened himself up and kind of removed that blindness temporarily from him, it leaves him vulnerable to something like this to begin with. Because we'll see later on in how the announcer isn't blinded because he's wearing sunglasses, let's say.
Right. And then his follow-up attack, of course, being the back of the head
Yes.
as a reflection of what the attack was as well, right?
Right, exactly. It's the undermining, right? And striking at that weakest position. Because even think about what an eclipse is. The moon isn't as big as the sun, not even close. But it can position itself in such a way to cover the sun if it's at the right spot. And so here we see that kind of Tien trying to separate body and spirit within Jackie Chun by attacking that back of his head. And it's also another indication of the arrogance and deception that Tien has, thinking that this, first of all, will knock Roshi out, and second of all, is something that is honorable to do, I guess.
Well, he attacks Jackie from a dark position that is his blind spot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the opposite of having the sun to your back, right? Because Roshi is oriented in a very good way. He's being truthful in this sense, right?
Right. It's
So
like
he's
killing
oriented toward the
Abel.
light.
Mm-hmm.
And so the angle that Tien is coming from is from sort of the perfect dark, opposite of that, his blind spot, because he's oriented the other way around, right? So they're diametrically opposed. At least he's trying to express that he's diametrically opposed to the way that Jackie Chun slash Roshi is, right?
Right. And so he's pretty convinced that Jackie will never awaken again and that Roshi is now in a coma. He didn't kill him because he wants to continue in the tournament. Um,
He
but
thinks so highly of himself that he thinks that he's both defeated the spiritual father and preserved the spiritual father.
yeah, and it's 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 indicative of some of the walls that need to be torn down here in the next couple of scenes with Tien to start this process.
Yeah.
And when Jackie Chun gets up, and this is what Brock was mentioning earlier, he tells Tien that he should treat his elders with more respect. And that whole idea that we were talking about earlier with Jackie grappling with Tien and how that shows that lack of respect and the acknowledgement of the weakness of the ancestral spirits, and that they're or not even their spirits, but the weakness manifest in the ancestral beings, the the flaws that our ancestors hold, let's say. That acknowledgement and exploitation of it is something that is an unholy manifestation, and Roshi recognizes that.
And it is powerful, right? It is an extremely powerful force, sort of in the cosmic setup of Dragon Ball. It needs to sort of be portrayed as something that is to be taken as a threat, right?
And it's a deconstruction too, right? Like that's the ideas that TN is starting to grapple with is the idea of deconstructing these things and revealing the weakness of the father and having that be instantiated enough to where he can be victorious. And so that's kind of the last thing we see in that little section. And then we get into our kind of the meat of this, which is when Jackie's really pressing Tien to start questioning how he is acting and the path that he's on, those kinds of things. So Jackie then asks Tien why he refuses to use such techniques for good. He implores him to break ties with the Crane Hermit and stop following the path of evil. Break free from the evil path of darkness, he tells him. Try entering the world of light, which that line will come up later. Um, Significantly, I think repetition in stories can be used really well or really dumbly. Particularly the repetition of lines like enter the world of light. Particularly also in Game of Thrones, Moon Boy and that line that Jamie
Right.
says. And here I think it plays well. And so Tien then attacks furiously, but to no avail. Jackie asks if he feels lost now that he's run out of techniques. He reminds him that living a simple life is more fun. Outside of the ring, Goku asks Krillin how the announcer was able to see the fight through the solar flare, and learns about sunglasses. Jackie Chun asks Tien if he prefers to live a life like the Crane Hermit, where everybody hates him. The Crane Hermit then recognizes Jackie Chun as Roshi and warns Tien telepathically. When Tien calls Roshi out, Roshi asks him to keep his identity a secret, assuring them that he really does think that his skill was being wasted under the Crane Hermit. Tien responds with a powerful Kamehameha wave, which Roshi deflects to protect the audience. So we have a lot going on here.
Yes.
The first thing is the conversation that starts off where Roshi is not begging, but really just wanting him
He's
to
appealing to the goodness that he knows is
that
within
he
him, right?
knows, yeah, that is definitely there as well. And yeah,
He's basically saying like, I bashed my head against yours and I saw that there's goodness within you. So he's appealing to that sight that Tien has, right? He's saying, can't you see, obviously with the enlightenment that you have, what you should be doing?
and he's like, "Yes, I can, but I'm actively not doing that, which
He
is hurting me." And it's a
he tries
conflict.
to be an edge lord. He's like,
Yeah.
you'll see just how cruel I really am.
And then he attacks furiously, but to no avail. And he's kind of haunted by the words that Roshi's been saying to him. And it's clear that even though the match itself seems to still be evenly tied, it's clear the spiritual battle is being won by Jackie. Tien is starting to break here. And so he attacks Jackie, and when he's challenged there, Jackie's able to meet his every attack, and he still isn't able to overpower him. And he brings up valid points about the Crane Hermit and about living a simple and happy life. And again, it's only when that happens and Tien is about to attack again that the Crane Hermit recognizes Roshi. And now I want to say I think the Crane Hermit is able to recognize him because it's starting to blend, because Jackie Chun's manifestation and purpose is starting to blend with Roshi's. And so he's revealing and more of his authentic self to the world
As he's being revealed to be the Roshi, right?
as he's being revealed to be the Roshi, the ancestral spirit that we've talked about.
Yes.
And so instantly Crane Hermit is able to call him out, and
And
Roshi asks Tien to keep that secret. And it's funny because it wouldn't be, it's kind of understated how trusting Roshi is of Tien. He shouldn't be.
he says again, pay some respect to your elders.
Mm-hmm.
He's appealing to him again, but in a more direct way, right?
And then for the last time that we see, Tien responds violently to this and tries to use the Kamehameha wave, the logos power of the heroic spirit, to set order from chaos. He tries to use that on Roshi.
He tries to speak the truth.
To
And what
Roshi.
truth does he try to speak, right? But you're Roshi, right? He says, oh, you're telling me not to say it. I will speak the truth. And Roshi says, if this hits the audience, right, they're all endangered. Which is to say that he's going to speak the blindness of the spiritual father to everybody
Mm-hmm.
and demoralize all of them toward the spirit of the father.
And so
And so Roshi deflects it up and tosses it away.
he sends that knowledge to a higher plane where it's
It
unaccessible from there,
disperses.
and
Yeah.
he's able to protect his own image. So curious, did you want to mention any parts here?
There are
Uh,
several things.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's the point when Roshi calls him out for having no more techniques, right? He says,
Hmm.
"What's the matter? Or do you feel lost because you've run out of techniques?" And that's really to point out what we were saying, where it comes down to raw skill, and he's obviously not going to match him in just raw skill in that sense. And then he says, "Do you feel lost now? Because your whole identity seemed to be about how you were better than me." Right? It's really pointing out that he without that he doesn't have a purpose, and that now he could reorient himself toward a better purpose. Is to ask him, "Do you feel lost? I have a place for you," right?
Hmm.
If you've reached your limit, there's more for you, right? And he's appealing to that in him, which he recognizes from the spirit, like Goku has, right? Says, "Do you want to stay bad or do you want to better yourself?" Right? If you could find a better way to better yourself, would you be able to go on that path? Would that
Well,
be your path?
I wouldn't even say that if he knew the way, because he does know the
Right.
way. He knows what he should do. He's choosing not to do it, and that's kind of where Roshi's appealing, is trying to get him to make that conscious decision to be good, to do good, right? Do good things in the world instead of using his powers for evil.
Yes.
And so, um, I think that also that whole being lost part, I like what you were saying about that. Roshi is seeing the point that he can divert his path, because it is true that a spirit that is compelled by arrogance and deceit, like Tien's is in the beginning of the arc, once that's revealed to be nonsense, it's kind of debases their whole purpose. And that's when they do have to start building that back up, like you were saying. I just wanted to mention that out.
No, that's a good ad. The next thing I want to point out is the sunglasses. So Goku learns about
Yes.
what the sunglasses mean. Um, so he sees that Roshi would have been able to tank that with his sunglasses on. And so there's this question of why. Why is it that when it's used against Jackie Chun, it's so devastating that it could potentially knock him out? But if it were Roshi, he could protect himself against it, right?
It's
And that's
it's
that Roshi has oriented himself away from his responsibility, right? He willfully chooses that blindness.
right, and by choosing that blindness, he's insulated himself from the idea that other people can block the let's say enlightenment manifest from encountering the chaos and creating order.
Right.
He's already kind of accepted that, and the spiritual father, in the sense of the spiritual father, he's already accepted the fact that he is a hermit. He's on his own. He doesn't need to go out and experience the world to be able to gain that enlightenment. But here we've seen manifest his true self in a way. Jackie Chun is doing just that. And so by doing it as Jackie Chun, that is the difference between him and Roshi. And why the Crane Hermit too is blind to it is because he's instantiating that kind of antichrist spiritual
Right.
father, let's say.
He's insulating himself against recognizing it in other people, right?
Right, because it's in making that blindness is another, also has the meaning of looking inward instead of looking without to get the enlightenment.
Right, to recognize the self outwardly, but to look inwardly and to sort of to be an island unto oneself, right?
Exactly, and that's what Goku does learn by experiencing that, and you're right.
But yeah, seeing that Goku recognizes that that's an aspect of Roshi's character and integrates that here is not to be understated, right? Like this is to show that Tien, what he's about to tell Roshi about the speed that he can integrate new ideas, Goku's acting it out first. by being able to recognize what the sunglasses mean in relation to
Right,
that and
Goku's
being
not
able
saying
to,
it, he's doing it.
yeah, he knows like that, right? So he integrates. It's a pretty big idea, just the sight that is reflective of the sight of the blind father, right? The ability to integrate the blindness of a blind father's sight to protect oneself against something like this.
Mhm.
In this moment is it's really impressive actually.
And so even him mentioning about that, I mean, Krillin understands it, but he doesn't understand it on the spiritual level. He understands the diegetic mechanics of the world, which is kind of what would be explained in the community, right? Like, oh, Roshi or the announcer is able to withstand it because he has sunglasses on, and sunglasses make it darker for you. It's like there's more to it than that. I do want to mention too the announcer himself having that is an interesting twist because the announcer is not a spiritual father, not even kind of figure like that, but he does represent the arbiter of this hierarchy, meaning he's blind to a lot of those things too by subordinating himself to the hierarchy and looking within that instead of being without.
Right, it's almost like being the analyst of one specific thing narrows your vision, right? And I think that
And
his
it can
vision
make
is
someone a master.
right. And that's sort of that mastery is whenever it sort of dials into that sense. And so he's sort of playing a similar role in that sense where it's like this just seems to be the entire purpose of his character is to be able to translate what's happening in the ring to the people, right?
And that's important though. It's so important too that mantle of responsibility the sunglasses is brought upon the announcer, and he's able to see. And the last thing that we need to actually two things. So Crane Hermit calling Roshi out. What do you think about that? Because we talked about that a little bit a second ago.
So I think um it's when Roshi points out the blindness of the crane hermits whenever he calls out, I think specifically, would you like to live a life like the crane hermit where everyone hates you? I think it's when he points that out that the crane hermit recognizes that it's Roshi and then lets Tien know.
Yep.
So it's sort of like his response to his pupil seeing him in that light, which is that's what happens, right? He speaks a reality about something bigger than, this narrow view that he has. He says,
It's almost
"Your
like
whole
he's hitting him
life."
with Kamehameha
Yeah.
waves, right? And
He's
that's
but he's
why,
literally speaking it at him,
yeah.
right? That's why a lot of this section is just their conversation because everything that's happening is actually being explicated.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think that that's why he recognizes him then, as it's sort of like who would be able to point out these aspects of me but Roshi?
Right. What what other figure would be on a spiritual plane that would be able to understand the flaws that are inherent in the way that I'm acting?
Exactly. And so I think that's why he immediately knows, oh, if this is what you're being enlightened to,
Well, there
it's
and
got to be
as
this.
we are going to learn very soon, these two are the only two left from a generation of martial artists that had adopted an ultimate spiritual stance by what they had to do in the past. And so he obviously knows that it has to be someone like that. Obviously, he's not a cat, so it's not Korin, even though I think Shen is somewhat aware of Korin. But other than that, who else could it be?
Right.
And so yeah, he's able to call him out. And the thing I like is the trust. It's almost, and I've been reading some Cicero recently. The way to gain the admiration and goodwill of people that you're trying to gain to your cause involves a level of trust. And the very first thing that Tien does here whenever he learns that it's really Roshi is, sorry, the first thing Roshi does is
Right.
he asks Tien to keep his confidence. Tien doesn't have to do that. Tien could tell Goku and Krillin right now. He could really demoralize them by telling them right now. He could achieve his goal better than even beating them in the ring right now.
Right. Is this your goal? or do you really want to be on the path of demoralizing people, right? He hands him the rope to hang himself with, right?
Yeah. And he says, "Here you go. This would be the final straw, right? Like revealing the nakedness of the father to people who are both respecting and still dependent on that wisdom. Spoiling the well, right? Poisoning the well." Indicating the admiration that these young men have for their master is shouldn't be.
Precisely. It's something that was set up from the beginning of the last tournament arc, right? What would it mean for somebody to do that? And so
Mhm.
we're finally getting to that point.
And so, unable to utter a response on that spiritual level, even though Tien is enlightened, he's not able to articulate all of that enlightenment. He responds with a Kamehameha wave of his own, indicating that he is Roshi, as we said earlier. But Roshi is able to deflect it. Um, Being someone who's been wielding truth the entire time in this fight, he's easily going to be able to manipulate this beam of enlightened truth, which shouldn't even be known by the audience to begin with, and that's why it's
Yeah,
launched by
he has to
Tien,
protect them from that truth, right?
and that's why it's launched by Tien because Tien is a perverted version of that, right? He's able to pervert the whole
He's able to
purpose of
take
it.
the truth and make it demoralize people,
Hmm.
right?
Exactly.
One thing that I think is fun and interesting about this part as well, I think it's in this section that there's a moment when Launch pulls her gun out and fires it into the air and says, "Kill him," and they're all embarrassed. The question is, who's she rooting for?
It is. Kill him.
We don't know.
Because is yeah, even still, we know that Launch doesn't really know who Jackie Chun is. She wasn't here the first tournament. Just remember.
Hmm.
So that's when we are going to move on to our last phase of this episode. Tien tells Roshi that he's able to master techniques to that degree by simply witnessing them, even though there was an extremely weak Kamehameha wave.
Comparatively, it wouldn't destroy a
A
fire
moon.
mountain or a moon.
A moon. I mean, not to even get into Dragon Ball what ifs, but is it even would it even be hard to say that Tien would be crushed by Goku Great Ape? Probably.
Well, yeah.
So Roshi compliments Tien's skill and reminds him to walk the path of light, again telling him enter that world of light, telling him that he has looked forward to the day when such lads would appear. He then turns around and casually walks to the edge of the ring, hopping out and disqualifying himself. The Crane Hermit tries to telepathically convince Tien that Roshi forfeited because he knew he couldn't win, but Tien knows that this is not true. When Goku and Krillin ask why he threw the match, he reminds them of their upcoming fight, remarking that the time has come to see what kind of new era is coming. And so we get to the end of this, where Roshi does step down. Now, there's a couple of important parts. The very first thing we see is what you were saying earlier, Tien's claim that he can master these techniques, which is articulated by Tien, but embodied by Goku and instantaneously achieved by neither. And I think that's important to say because there's sometimes in later Dragon Ball iterations where Goku seems to be able to do it without implementing the techniques that Korin taught him, which is important
Right.
to the story that we see. And so it's not just instantaneous. You can't just do it by seeing it, but by integrating it, you can.
Right. And so, similar to the way that Goku was able to integrate the knowledge of what, sunglasses would be in response to something like this, Tien is able to integrate a mode of being, right? So that he can use it to his own advantage. And in that sense, he's able to integrate the truthful way of the turtle hermit, right? And
Hmm.
use it oriented in a different direction, and he
As
does it
far
very
as he can
quickly.
understand it,
Yeah,
which is not much. That's why it's so weak, is because he doesn't understand the true power of telling the truth and what truth could be wielded as such. But this is not chaos that should be undone. This is kind of chaos that should be, as in Jackie Chun. The chaos and confusion that Jackie Chun represents for the boys, because obviously he is a deception in and of himself, is necessary for the greater goal that Jackie Chun and Roshi share.
right. Because it's important that someone doesn't participate in the pattern of trying to ultimately strike down the spirit of the father, right?
Hmm.
But to keep it in a revered space. And so, if he's revealed to be Roshi, then it can't be a legitimate contest, right? They can't ultimately stay good and defeat him, right?
Right, because then that would be doing what Tien was doing by kneeing him in the back of the head.
Exactly.
And so after that, after Tien says that, and after Roshi has seen him use the Kamehameha wave, he is convinced that the chaos inherent in Tien's mode of being and the way that Goku or Krillin are going to have to tackle that eventually when they get into the final round is such that the knowledge of that is greater than what can be manifest artificially by the instantiation of Jackie Chun, whereas Roshi would be controlling that aspect.
Which is
This
to
is
say that
more of a what do I want to say? More of a natural way for it to come about.
right. And that's to say that the person now that Tien would be fighting is Roshi. And Roshi is acknowledging that to be fighting Goku and Krillin on that next level, they would have to be competing on the base level of understanding that they're fighting against Roshi as well because of the meaning of these fights. And he won't allow it, right?
Hmm.
It's not something that he thinks that they should engage with at all. And so he pretty much pulls the ultimate move in this situation.
Well, he undercuts too Tien's ability to continue in his mode of being by forfeiting. He has,
He's robbed him of it.
well, what did he introduce to Tien here? Ultimately, chaos. He used his position as a spiritual father to point out the flaws of Tien and debase the order that held up Tien's existence such that he now is mired in such chaos that he doesn't even understand why Roshi would walk out of the ring, why he would forfeit. And it causes him a lot of strife. Uh, he can already see, too, that when Crane Hermit tries to convince him of a lie that he would have believed 10 minutes ago, because Crane Hermit says that Roshi forfeited because he knew he couldn't win, but Tien says that he knows it's not true. He wouldn't have known it's not true if he hadn't participated honestly in the fight that he just did.
Right. He's realizing that the scope of what he was trying to come up against was well beyond this ring, right? It's something that he can't contend with just by participating in this particular expression or hierarchy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't want to believe it. There's also the implication here that if this is Roshi, he believes that his students are strong enough that he doesn't even need to protect his own school. He's saying, my students will protect my school, right? Like, I'm not even stressing. Goku's going to defeat you.
And another thing too, it's the answering of that aggressive spirit, because we've only seen Tien be aggressive. He choked Roshi in the last episode, right? And
Hmm.
every time that Roshi's trying to bring him towards a path that would benefit him, he's acted violently or used the Kamehameha wave against him, right? And so Roshi is kind of understood. Not only does he not need to participate in order for Krillin and Goku to be properly challenged, but the answer to the way that Tien is acting is to show him that there's another path that supersedes the path he's on.
One that is not older than him, right?
Mm-hmm. And so he jumps out of the ring.
because that's what Goku can bring, sort of, and that's what Goku is as that renewing self archetype, right? It's going to rejuvenate Tien's sight whenever they come up against each other, because that's what Goku can do at being a child. That's what he does for most characters, right?
Many, yes. He renews their sight. Yeah.
And so he says, that he's excited that it's finally time for him to do that, right? To step down and see what a new what a new era
Generation. Yeah.
is going to look like.
And so this is very important because one of the first steps we see Dragon Ball start to transcend traditional mythology. Because we never see a point where Gandalf is like, I'm ready to step down as the spiritual father of this story, right? He does leave Middle Earth, but we don't really get that conclusion. And maybe if Tolkien had lived forever, he could have written more books about it. But this is the one of the first parts that we see that start to transition, where Roshi admits that the spiritual level in which he is able to provide nourishment for the boys and his students is coming to an end.
Right. He's recognizing that.
But we haven't, I don't think we see it manifested well in other media. When Yoda dies, for example, right? He's supposed to pass that on to Luke.
I feel like there's an inversion of that with what Disney did with the story, right? Which was to destroy what he was supposed to hand down to Luke. Very obvious what they're doing with the story in that sense, but the it feels like most stories don't get to this point before they get corrupted.
Right, which in this is the very beginning of Dragon Ball,
Yeah,
basically. It's
it's
like,
so
well,
hard
let's
to
say the middle.
yeah, it's so hard to find an analog whenever we get to certain parts, because it's like, okay,
They've already
Dark
sold
Souls,
out.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say because a lot of them, you're right, have already sold out by that time. The establishment first of the genesis of the story, right? That's typically people have kind of gotten that down, right? They can tell an origin story,
People
have it
love the
be
golden age.
mythological, golden age left and right, 10 iterations of it. It's whenever they get past that and whenever we start moving past into the story of the modern, and let's say, yeah, the
Modern
modern
mythos.
self and the modern myth,
Yeah.
that it's gets into kind of unknown territory, and that's where Dragon Ball really shines because oh my, is it
Yeah.
so relevant.
It's like we're about to get to Z,
Yeah, we're only
because I
60
think Z
episodes.
really starts with this. Z really starts with King Piccolo, right? Because the main plot of Z is resolving the existence of Piccolo as a
No,
concept,
no, no.
almost.
Well, we'll get there.
Yeah,
Let's
we'll
not.
go there, right?
Well,
But
we are on the way.
we're so close, and I do think, I want to call it now. I think a lot of what that is in the story has to do with what's happening with stepping down, right?
Hmm.
Where there has to be a new splitting and then convergence. There has to be a new responsibility to be
Well,
taken on.
the old guardians have to be obsoleted by the new chaos. Osiris here
It's the
is
rejuvenating
not torn
process.
apart,
Yeah.
but he does have to step down.
Well, not
And
yet.
that's the thing. What?
I said not yet.
Not yet, right. We're going to see in a couple episodes because you are right, we're pretty close.
But I think stepping down is the catalyst, We're
Right, and
really
that's what I'm
stepping into
saying.
this new world now.
It's because the old order manifest is no longer enough to deal with the current chaotic potential that enters the world.
Right, there needs to be a new restructuring, a new myth has to play itself out for the
Well, and
new generation, right?
we'll get there. We'll get there.
But
In the
yeah,
next
it's
few
a
episodes.
big moment. It's a huge moment here also, because Tien is witnessing something that he can't comprehend. It's above his sight. That's what's really really fucking him up here, right? He's standing here and his whole identity is tied up with the fact that he has a heightened vision, right? He's enlightened. He's got his third eye, but he can't actually figure out the scope of what's happening with Roshi stepping down.
Right, and
It goes beyond his sight completely.
it's because his side is we've already said arrogant and deceitful, meaning it's very centric on the self. It's not out. It's not. Yeah, I guess.
Well, it's
It's
like
not
this, right?
inwardly or
Imagine. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
I was gonna say it's not inwardly focused in the same way that the spirituality should be attained.
Hmm.
It's really focused
Should be
towards
outward.
selfish
Yeah.
goals.
Well, in that sense, I feel like so you've got a teenage boy, and he's like, he doesn't appreciate his dad, and he's like, whatever, you don't fucking do anything for this family. Dad says, okay, family's yours. Here's all these responsibilities. Boom. Like the stepping down of the father figure and the handing of a world that has not been conceptualized by the I don't want to say immature, but there is that lack of maturity in the way that Tien is, that he hasn't, no matter how enlightened he is, he hasn't lived long enough to
But
understand.
let's take somewhat of an analog here in Berserk. So in Berserk, the golden age is really when the order and the manifestation of chaos are really low, right? The
Right.
order is high, manifestation of chaos is low.
Golden Order. Got it.
And then when that ends, right, it really gets the chaos is really superseding and overtaking. And what we see later on with Fantasia and stuff, that happens. But
Right.
in that Black Swordsman arc, that's kind of the debasement of it. And where we're at right now with Tien is and the whole dragon world, let's say, is the lowering of the order of the world because the responsibility is now being taken off of Roshi as he steps down and lets the heroes
It's basically
manifest
setting
themselves.
the stone down, and it's like, all right, here it is.
Yeah.
You clearly can hoist it, right?
And they can, and we'll see what they do.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so it is a really big moment, and I think in the next couple episodes we're gonna get into more. I want to mention again what you were saying about it being the catalyst of the next arc, and we'll get there once we get to that arc because
Yeah.
it's very important. But I think that's gonna bring us to the end, unless Brock, did you have anything else? I think we covered everything.
I think that's it, Roshi gets his, or as Jackie Chun, he gets his coat back from Bulma, which when he threw it off and revealed himself, it landed on her head and blinded her, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he takes it back and her eyes are bulging out as if she's witnessed something, right? Um, and then he walks off. And whenever Goku and Krillin ask why he threw it, he doesn't have an answer for them. He just says, your match is next.
Right, he keeps them on the path.
He's like, no, this is the story now. Don't even look at me.
Mm-hmm.
Your match is beyond what I was about to be able to do. So,
And it's true. Uh, it's obvious in subtlety that Roshi knows this is the last outing of Jackie Chun. He's kind of sad of it. There's a sadness about it.
yeah, it feels like a big moment. It plays it out. See it on screen now. He walks into the light, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he's walking into the light.
Because he is what is it? Try entering the world of light. He follows his own path as well, his own advice, and so then he goes and he leaves the arena, and that's kind of where we end.
Right, and that's the thing. It's is he blinded by the technique that's supposed to blind him to the light? And no, he walks into the light at the end of the episode because
He's still able to see
he's
it, yeah.
showing that he's well above that knowledge of the way that the light functions in the world, right?
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think we hope you guys enjoyed this one. I had a blast talking about it.
Yeah.
So
There's just so much going on.
it is a lengthy one. We did spend an hour on it, so that's good.
Classic.
Yeah. All right. So if you guys enjoyed what you heard, please give us a like, subscribe. We upload on Mondays and Thursdays on YouTube, Tuesdays and Fridays on Rumble. Give us a subscribe. We'd also love to hear what you have to say in the comments, whether you agree, whether you disagree. Doesn't matter to us. We'd love to reply to what you have to say. I'm your host on the left, Owl.
I'm your host on the right, Brock.
And we hope you guys enjoyed the episode and have a good night.